The scars that never heal thee. Morning sun cast long shadows across the memorial plaza in New Seoul. Captain Sarah. Chun walked slowly between the towering black walls, each one carved with billions of names. Her boots clicked softly against the polished stone as she traced her finger along familiar letters. Chun Wei-ming, aged 8. Shen Lihua, aged 34. Shen David, aged 36. Her family. Gone for 10 years now. The city around her hummed with life. Gleaming towers stretched toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of Earth's renewed hope. Hover cars moved silently, the air lanes above. Children laughed in nearby parks. To any visitor, New Seoul looked like a paradise rebuilt from ashes. But Sarah knew better. She could see what others missed, the careful way people avoided looking up at the sky too long, the small shrines hidden in building corners, the way conversations grew quiet when someone mentioned the war. The scars ran deeper than any architect could heal. Captain Chun? A voice called behind her. Sarah turned to see Lieutenant Jung-hoon Park approaching. His left arm hung at an awkward angle, a reminder of the Battle of Bizan, where he'd lost everything that mattered to him. Like her, he wore his dress uniform today. Like her, he came here every month. The orders came through, Jung-hoon said, handing her a datapad. His voice was steady, but Sarah caught the slight tension in his shoulders. After serving together for 5 years, she knew his tells. Sarah read the message twice. The Galactic Council was calling for another peace summit. This time they claimed it would be different. This time they promised lasting agreements that would end all conflicts between species forever. What do you think? Jung-hoon asked. Sarah looked back at the memorial wall. 3 billion names. Mothers, fathers, children who had never hurt anyone. They had died screaming, while the Zarkonian fleets burned entire cities from orbit. The aliens had laughed, while they released plague bombs that turned Earth's green fields into poisoned wastelands. I think they want us to forget, Sarah said quietly. A group of alien tourists walked past, their translator devices chattering in a dozen languages. They stopped to read the memorial's inscription, their various faces showing what Sarah had learned to recognize as universal expressions of sorrow. One of them, a tall zircon with gentle blue skin, placed a small flower at the wall's base. The sight should have made Sarah feel better. The zircons had suffered under Zarkonian rule, too. They understood loss. But it only reminded her of what made this hard or not. All aliens were evil. Some had been victims just like humanity. That was what made forgiveness so complicated. The remembrance is ready for departure, Jung-hoon reported. Full crew, armed escort, diplomatic protocols loaded. Sarah nodded. The ship's name had been her choice when they commissioned it. Never again would humanity go into space unprepared. Every vessel now carried enough firepower to level a small moon. Every captain had sworn the same oath. Remember the dead. Protect the living. Trust no one completely. Ambassador Zex has requested a private meeting before we reach Nexus Station, Jung-hoon continued. He says it's about the Zarkonian delegation's new proposal. Sarah almost laughed. Zex was one of the few aliens she respected. The small, gray-skinned diplomat had spent years trying to bridge the gap between species. He meant well, but he didn't understand that some bridges were built from the bones of the innocent. Tell him I'll see him in my ready room, Sarah said. And Jung-hoon? Make sure our weapon systems are fully charged before we dock. Always are. Captain. As they walked toward the spaceport, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a building's surface. At 35, she looked older than her years. Command had aged her, but the war had aged her more. The woman who stared back at her had eyes that had seen too much and a jaw set with determination that bordered on stubbornness. Behind her reflection, the memorial wall stretched on for kilometers. Each section represented a different city, a different moment when the sky had filled with alien. Ships and death had rained down like snow. New Seoul, Old Seoul, Tokyo, Beijing, Los Angeles, Mumbai, Lagos, Cairo, London, all of them burning while the galaxy's peacekeepers had arrived too late to matter. The shuttle ride to orbit was quiet. Sarah watched Earth shrink below them, blue and green and beautiful again, after years of healing. Terraforming crews had worked miracles, but some scars would always remain. The Sahara Desert now bloomed with flowers, but the radiation signatures were still there, if you knew where to look. The Remembrance waited in high orbit, a sleek predator among the stars. 500 meters of humanity's finest engineering, bristling with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand anything the galaxy had ever built. It was beautiful and terrible, like humanity itself had become Dot. As Sarah walked onto the bridge, her crew stood at attention. Each face told a story. Commander Min Jun had lost his wife in the Singapore bombing. Navigation Officer Torres had been orphaned at age 12 when her parents died defending the Amazon colonies. Weapons Officer Kim had volunteered for enhancement surgery to better serve humanity's defense. They were all children of the war in their own way. Set course for Nexus Station, Sarah ordered. And remember, we go to listen, not to forgive. The stars stretched into lines as the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel. Behind them, Earth continued its slow dance around the sun, peaceful and protected. Ahead lay a galaxy that wanted them to forget the past and embrace a future built on hope instead of memory. Humanity remembered everything. Every death. Every scream. Every moment when help should have come but didn't. And Sarah, Chun intended to make sure they never forgot. The Galactic Council's Plea-Nexus Station hung in the void like a massive flower made of metal and light. Its 5 arms stretched for kilometers, each one hosting different species and their delegations. Sarah had been here before, but the sight still impressed her. The station was neutral ground, built by 100 different civilizations, working together. It was also the place where humanity had first learned that the galaxy was full of species who preferred talking to fighting. The Remembrance docked at the human section, its weapons powered down but ready. Sarah could see other ships through the viewport, elegant zircon vessels that looked like living coral, blocky Thrakari freighters, and sleek diplomatic cruisers from a dozen other worlds. And there, at the far end of the station, the Zarkonian warships. Dark and angular, like pieces of broken night, they still made Sarah's hands clench into fists. "Captain," Jung-hoon said quietly, "Ambassador Zex is requesting immediate audience." Sarah nodded. Better to get the diplomacy started quickly. Before her anger had time to build. X waited in the station's neutral meeting room, his small gray form almost lost in the large chair designed for bigger species. His large black eyes held the patient sadness that Sarah had learned to associate with him over the years. "Captain Chun," he said, his voice soft through the translator. "Thank you for coming." "The council ordered it," Sarah replied, sitting across from him. "What's this new proposal I keep hearing about?" Zex activated a holographic display between them. Images of destroyed worlds appeared in the air, some burned by Zarkonian fleets, others scarred by the wars that followed. Sarah recognized several human colonies among them. "The Zarkonian Empire wishes to make formal reparations," Zex said carefully. "They're offering to rebuild damaged worlds, provide medical aid, and submit to war crimes tribunals." Sarah stared at the display. "And in exchange?" "They want full integration back into galactic society. Trade agreements, defense pacts, a clean slate." The words hung in the air like poison. Sarah could feel her pulse quickening, the old anger rising in her chest like fire. "A clean slate," she repeated. "For genocide." "Sarah," Zex said, using her first name the way he did when he wanted her to listen carefully. The war has been over for 10 years. The galaxy is tired of conflict. Trade routes are still disrupted. Entire sectors avoid each other out of fear. This could end all of that. And what about justice? The tribunals would provide justice. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. Tribunals. Like the ones that took 5 years to decide whether bombing civilian targets was a war crime. Like the ones that called the plague bombs regrettable but understandable military tactics. Zex's shoulders sagged. I know the legal process has been difficult, but what alternative is there? More war? More death? Before Sarah could answer, an alarm sounded throughout the station. Red lights flashed, and the speaker system crackled to life. All personnel to secure positions. We have multiple unauthorized entries in sectors 7 to 12. This is not a drill. Sarah was on her feet instantly, her hand moving to her sidearm. Through the meeting room's window, she could see explosions blooming like deadly flowers across the station's far arm. Terrorists, Zex whispered. The extremist groups said they would disrupt the summit. Sarah activated her comm unit. Jung-hoon, status report. Captain, we've got attacks across the station. Looks like coordinated strikes from multiple groups. Some human, some alien. They're targeting diplomatic areas. Sarah cursed under her breath. She'd expected something like this, but hoped she'd been wrong. Peace summits always brought out the worst elements from every species. I'm moving to help with evacuation. She told Zex, stay here and... Another explosion rocked the station, much closer this time. Through the door's window, Sarah could see people running in panic. Humans, Zircons, Thrakari, and others fled together, their species differences forgotten in the face of immediate danger. Sarah opened the door and stepped into chaos. The station's main corridor was filled with smoke and frightened beings. She could hear weapons fire in the distance and the sound of bulkheads being breached. This way, she shouted, pointing toward the emergency shelters. Her voice cut through the noise, and both humans and aliens began moving in the direction she indicated. A group of Zarkonian civilians stumbled past, their dark skin marked with dust and fear. An elderly female carried a child who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. The child was crying, its large eyes wide with terror. Sarah felt her step falter. The child looked so small, so helpless. Just like human children had looked when the bombs fell on Earth. Behind them came 3 armed figures in environmental suits, their weapons aimed at the fleeing Zarkonians. Sarah couldn't tell what species the attackers were, but their intent was clear. Time seemed to slow. Sarah drew her sidearm and fired 3 precise shots. The attackers dropped before they could hurt anyone. The Zarkonian family stared at her in shock. Move, Sarah ordered, pointing toward the shelter. Now. The elderly female nodded quickly and hurried away with the child. As they passed, the little one looked back at Sarah with something that might have been gratitude. Sarah stood in the corridor for a moment, watching them go. She had just saved the life of a Zarkonian child, the same species that had murdered billions of human children without a second thought. The irony wasn't lost on her. Captain. Jung-hoon's voice came through her comm. We need you at Shelter Complex 9. There's a situation. Sarah ran through the damaged corridors, stepping over debris and helping injured beings when she could. The station's security forces were overwhelmed, trying to coordinate responses across multiple attack sites. She found Jung-hoon at the entrance to Shelter Complex 9, where nearly 200 beings had taken refuge. Humans, Zircons, Thrakari, and even a few Zarkonians sat together in the large space, all of them looking scared and tired. What's the situation? Sarah asked. The extremists have sealed off this section, Jung-hoon replied. They're demanding that all Zarkonians be handed over for justice if we don't comply. They'll breach the shelter and kill everyone. Sarah looked through the shelter's window at the mixed crowd inside. The Zarkonian family she'd saved sat in one corner, the elderly female still holding the frightened child. Near them, a human woman was sharing her emergency rations with a wounded Thrakari soldier. How many attackers? Sarah asked. At least 12, maybe more. Mixed species, heavily armed. Sarah considered her options. She could try to negotiate, but extremists rarely listen to reason. She could wait for station security, but that might take too long. Or she could do what she'd been trained to do. Get me a direct line to the attackers, she said. Jung-hoon established the connection. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the comm. This is Captain Sarah, Chun of the Human Defense Force. I want to speak to whoever's in charge out there. A harsh voice responded, run through scramblers to hide its identity. Captain Chun, we know who you are. We know what they did to your family. Help us finish what should have been done years ago. And what would that accomplish? Justice. Real justice, not the fake peace these diplomats want to sell us. Sarah looked at the shelter again. The human woman was now helping tend to the Zarkonian child's scraped knee. The sight should have made her angry, but instead just made her tired. I've seen enough justice for one lifetime, Sarah said finally. Stand down and let these people go. People? The voice laughed. Half of them aren't even human. Some of them are the same monsters who burn our worlds. Some of them are children. So were the ones who died on Earth. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. The voice was right, in a way. The children in that shelter weren't responsible for the war, but neither had the human children who died. Where did justice end and vengeance begin? Where did protection become murder? When she opened her eyes, she knew what she had to do. Jung-hoon, she said quietly. Prepare for assault. Non-lethal if possible, but protect the civilians at all costs. Even the Zarkonian civilians? Sarah met his eyes. All of them. As they prepared to move, Sarah caught sight of Zex approaching through the damaged corridor. The little diplomat looked shaken but determined. Captain, he said, the Council is prepared to offer humanity additional concessions if... Not now, Zex, Sarah interrupted. We have people to save. But this could be the chance for real peace. Sarah turned to face him fully. Peace isn't something you negotiate, Ambassador. It's something you build. One choice at a time. One life at a time. She gestured toward the shelter, where humans and aliens sat together, sharing food and comfort in the face of danger. Maybe it starts here. Asterisk Dr. Sarah. Chun stood in her laboratory at the Seoul Institute of Technology, watching data streams flow across her screens. She was 28 then, her hair still black, without the silver streaks that would come later. Her hands were soft, unmarked by the calluses that weapon training would leave behind. She was working on agricultural enhancement programs, trying to help feed Earth's growing population. The universe seemed full of infinite possibilities. Then the sky caught fire. Sarah jolted awake in her quarters, aboard the Remembrance, the old nightmare releasing its grip on her slowly. The ship was quiet around her, moving through hyperspace toward the next peace conference. 3 days had passed since the attack on Nexus Station, and the images still haunted her dreams, but not as much as the older images. Those never left. She sat up and activated her personal display, calling up the files she'd read 1,000 times. The official reports of the Zarkonian invasion. The casualty lists. The tactical analyses that tried to explain how an entire species could choose genocide as a first option. 1:0647 hours. Seoul Standard Time unidentified vessels detected at system edge. First contact protocols initiated. No response to communication attempts. Sarah remembered that morning. She'd been in the lab early, excited about a breakthrough in drought-resistant rice cultivation. The emergency broadcasts had seemed like a mistake at first. Aliens? Real aliens? The news feeds showed grainy images of massive dark ships approaching Earth. The world had watched in fascination, not fear. Humanity's first contact with another intelligent species. What an amazing day to be alive. Day 1. 11:34 hours orbital bombardment commenced without warning. Primary targets appear to be population centers. Sydney, Lagos, and Mumbai under direct attack. Sarah closed the file and opened another. This one was Jung-hoon's personal account, written years later during his recovery from combat stress. I was a teacher then, Jung-hoon had written. 3rd grade mathematics in Busan. My wife Mi-jong taught art at the same school. Our daughter Hana was 6 years old, all bright eyes and endless questions about everything. The children were excited when we heard about the alien ships. They drew pictures of friendly creatures with big eyes, imagining the wonderful things we might learn from each other. We never got the chance to learn anything except how to die. The first bombs hit at lunchtime. The school's windows exploded inward, and I covered my students with my own body as glass rained down like sharp snow. Mi-young was in the art room when the ceiling collapsed. I found her 3 days later, still holding a child's drawing of a rainbow. Hannah died in my arms while we waited for rescue that never came. The medics were all dead. The hospitals were all gone. She kept asking me why the sky people were angry with us. I never found an answer to give her. Sarah closed that file too. She'd read it too many times, but she couldn't stop herself from returning to it. The raw pain in Jung-hoon's words reminded her why they couldn't simply forgive and forget. She opened her cum channel. Jung-hoon, report to my ready room. He arrived within minutes, looking as tired as she felt. The attack on Nexus Station had brought back bad memories for all of them. Couldn't sleep either? Jung-hoon asked, settling into the chair across from her. The dreams are getting worse, Sarah admitted. Every time we talk about peace, I see their faces again. Your family? Everyone. My family, your family, the children from the schools we couldn't save. 3 billion ghosts demanding to know why we're even considering this. Jung-hoon was quiet for a moment. His left arm, the one damaged in the war, twitched slightly, a nervous habit he'd never fully overcome. Do you remember Lieutenant Seo-yeon? He asked finally. Asterisk. Sarah nodded. Seo-yeon had been a Zircon officer who'd fought alongside human forces during the last year of the war. She'd died defending the Mars colonies from a Zarkonian assault. She told me something once, Jung-hoon continued, about her homeworld. The Zarkonians enslaved her people for 3 generations before we met them, worked them in mines until they died, used them for medical experiments, treated them like tools instead of beings. I remember. But she also told me that some individual Zarkonians had tried to help. Not many, but a few. Guards who shared food, doctors who refused to participate in the experiments, even some who helped Zircons escape. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. So maybe the question isn't whether we can forgive an entire species. Maybe it's whether we can tell the difference between the ones who chose evil and the ones who didn't. Sarah brought up another file on her display, footage from the liberation of Kepler colony. The human settlement had been turned into a work camp, its population forced to mine rare minerals for the Zarkonian war machine. The images were hard to watch. Emaciated humans in rags, children who'd known nothing but slavery. May SS graves, where those too weak to work had been discarded. When the rescue ships arrived, many of the survivors couldn't even remember their own names. But there was something else in the footage that Sarah had noticed years later, during her 3rd or 4th viewing. In the background of one scene, a Zarkonian guard could be seen helping a human child reach a water source. The action was small, almost hidden, but it was there. I've seen the footage, Sarah said. 1 guard out of hundreds. Does that excuse the rest? No, Jung-hoon replied firmly. It doesn't excuse anything, but it means something. Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of command and memory pressing down on her. Through the viewport, stars streamed past in lines of light. Each one might hold worlds where similar choices between justice and mercy were being made. The young Zarkonian I saved on Nexus Station, she said quietly. A child. Do you think it will grow up to be like its parents? I don't know. Do you think human children grow up to be exactly like their parents? Sarah considered this. Her own father had been a career soldier, tough and uncompromising. Her mother had been a diplomat, always looking for peaceful solutions. Sarah had become something between them, a warrior who still believed in protecting the innocent. The war changed us, she said finally. Made us harder, stronger, but also more afraid. It had to change us. The species we were before the war couldn't have survived what they did to us. Sarah activated another file, casualty reports from the Battle of Luna. Humanity's first major victory against the Zarkonian fleet. The tide had turned there, when human ingenuity and desperate courage had overcome superior firepower. She remembered watching the battle from Earth's surface, seeing the explosions light up the night sky. Each flash of light had meant ships dying, people dying on both sides. But for the first time since the invasion began, some of those dying ships had been Zarkonian. We became killers to survive, Sarah said. The question is whether we can stop being killers now that we have. Can we? Sarah thought about the Zarkonian child she'd saved, about the human woman sharing food with wounded aliens, about Ambassador Zex's patient hope for a better galaxy. I don't know, she admitted, but maybe we have to try. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because we deserve to be more than what the war made us. Jung-hoon smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in weeks. Seo Young would have liked that answer. She was good people. For an alien, the best kind of people, human or otherwise. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two survivors sharing the burden of memory. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small struggles of small beings, trying to find their way between justice and mercy. Sarah closed the files on her display, but kept one open, a picture of Earth as it looked now, green and blue and beautiful again. Gardens grew where craters had been. Children played where battlefields had raged. The planet had healed, even if its people still carried scars. Jung-hoon, she said, when we get to the next conference, I want you to set up a meeting with some of the younger Zarkonian delegates. Not the war leaders, not the politicians, the ones who weren't even born when the fighting started. What do you want to say to them? Sarah looked at Earth's image one more time before closing the file. I want to see if they're worth the chance we're thinking about giving them. As Jung-hoon left her ready room, Sarah remained alone with her thoughts and her ghosts. 3 billion dead demanded justice, but the living demanded hope. Somehow, she had to find a way to honor both. The ship continued through hyperspace, carrying its cargo of memories toward an uncertain future. Behind them lay the ashes of the past. Ahead lay choices that would define not just humanity's destiny, but its soul. Asterisk. The second peace summit lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Sarah stood on the bridge of the remembrance, watching through the viewport as the Harmony Station built, specifically for this conference, erupted in explosions. What was supposed to be humanity's final chance at reconciliation with the galaxy had turned into another battlefield. Captain, we're receiving distress signals from 17 different ships, reported Navigation Officer Torres. Multiple hull breaches across the civilian sections. How many attackers? Sarah asked, her voice calm despite the chaos outside. At least 40 vessels. Jung-hoon replied from his position at the tactical station. Mixed fleet composition. We've identified human extremist groups, Zarkonian hardliners, and what looks like Thrakari separatists. They're coordinating their attacks. Sarah cursed under her breath. She'd expected some violence, but this was war. The extremists from multiple species had apparently decided that peace was more dangerous than continued conflict. Incoming transmission from Admiral Shun No Relation. Torres announced. The holographic image of Admiral Marcus Chun, commander of the Human Defense Fleet, appeared before Sarah. His weathered face was grim, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from some recent action. Captain Chun, we've got a situation that's spiraling beyond local security. The extremists aren't just hitting the station. They're targeting refugee ships, medical vessels, even children's transports. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. How many casualties? Unknown, but estimates are in the thousands already. The Zarkonian Empress's personal transport is under direct attack. If she dies here, this ends any hope of peace for the next century. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. 6 months ago, she would have celebrated news of the Zarkonian Empress's death. Now, she found herself caring about keeping the alien leader alive. What are your orders, Admiral? Form a mixed defense fleet. I'm authorizing you to coordinate with any allied vessels in the area, regardless of species. Your priority is protecting civilian evacuations. Sarah looked at Jung-hoon, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his expression. Allied vessels. That meant working alongside Zarkonian ships, the same ships that had once bombed Earth into ruin. Acknowledged. Admiral. We'll get it done. As the transmission ended, Sarah turned to her crew. Every face on the bridge carried the same mix of determination and conflict. They were good soldiers, trained to follow orders, but this pushed against everything they'd been taught to feel. You heard the Admiral, Sarah announced. We're forming a defense fleet. That means Zarkonian vessels, Zarkon ships, even Thrakari if they're willing to help. Our job is to protect civilians, whatever species they are. Captain, Communications Officer Kim spoke up. We're receiving a direct transmission from the Zarkonian dreadnought Bloodfire. Their commander wants to coordinate attacks. Sarah almost laughed. The Bloodfire had been present at the Battle of Mars. She'd watched it destroy 3 human frigates with single volleys. Now its commander wanted to work together. Put him through. The hologram that appeared was tall and imposing, with the dark gray skin and ceremonial scars that marked him as Zarkonian military nobility. War Chief Zircon, if Sarah remembered the intelligence files correctly. Captain Chun, Zircon said, his translated voice carrying surprising respect. I propose we divide the defense sectors. My ships will handle the attacking Zarkonian vessels. Your fleet can focus on the human and Thrakari extremists. Why? Sarah asked bluntly. Why help us? Zircon was quiet for a moment. Behind him, Sarah could see his bridge crew working frantically at their stations. Young Zarkonians, some of them barely adults, trying to save lives instead of taking them. Because my daughter is on one of those refugee ships, Zircon said finally. And she deserves to live in a galaxy where species can coexist, even if her father helped create one where they couldn't. Sarah studied the alien commander's face, looking for deception or hidden motives. She found only the same desperate determination she'd seen in human parents during the war. Agreed, she said. We'll take sectors 7 through 12. Try not to shoot us by mistake. The same courtesy is requested, Captain. As the transmission ended, Sarah felt Jung-hoon move to stand beside her. Are we really doing this? He asked quietly. Fighting alongside them? We're fighting for the innocent, Sarah replied. Same as always. The next 3 hours became a blur of tactical decisions and impossible choices. Sarah found herself coordinating with alien commanders she'd never imagined speaking to, let alone trusting with human lives. Commander Seo Yan, a Zircon officer whose people had suffered under Zarkonian rule, led her ships with precision and courage. Her vessels moved like dancers, weaving through enemy fire to rescue escape pods from multiple species. Captain Minjun, commanding the human cruiser Soul's Pride, worked alongside a Thrakari, heavy destroyer to clear a path for medical evacuation ships. Even some individual Zarkonian ships, crewed by those who rejected their species' extremist elements, joined the defense. They fought against their own people to protect the ideals of peace their leaders claimed to embrace. "Captain," Torres called out, "we've got multiple breaches in Refugee Sector 4. Looks like extremist boarding parties." Sarah checked the tactical display. Sector 4 held mostly Zarkonian civilians, families, elderly, and children evacuated when the fighting started. "Jung-hoon, prepare boarding teams. We're going in." "Ma'am, those are civilians under attack," Sarah finished firmly. "That's all that matters right now." The boarding action was swift and brutal. Sarah led the assault team through the damaged civilian transport, finding scenes that reminded her too much of Earth during the invasion. Bodies in corridors, emergency lights flickering, the sound of weapons fire echoing through the ship's hull. In the main refugee bay, they found the extremist humans wearing the insignia of the Pure Earth movement. They had cornered several dozen Zarkonian families in a cargo hold, executing them one by one, while others watched in terror. Sarah felt rage flood through her system, but it wasn't directed where she expected. These humans, her own species, were committing the same atrocities that had been inflicted on Earth. They had become the very monsters they claimed to oppose. "Stand down," Sarah ordered, her weapon trained on the lead extremist. The man turned, his face twisted with hate. "Captain Chun, you're famous among our people, the woman who lost everything to these animals. Join us. Help us finish what they started." Sarah looked past him to the Zarkonian families cowering in the corner. An elderly female held a young child, the same child Sarah had saved on Nexus Station. The child's large eyes met Sarah's, and she saw recognition there, along with hope. "I lost my family to war," Sarah said quietly. "I won't let you turn children into casualties in the name of my grief. They're not children, they're future soldiers. Future killers. Right now, they're just scared kids who want their parents to keep them safe." Sarah fired once, dropping the extremist leader. Her assault team quickly overwhelmed the others, but not before more civilians had died. As the medical teams rushed in, Sarah found herself kneeling beside a wounded Zarkonian female who couldn't have been more than 16. A young alien looked up at her, struggling to speak. "Why?" she whispered in broken standard. "Why help us?" Sarah thought about her answer for a moment. "Because someone has to break the cycle." The young Zarkonian smiled weakly before the medics carried her away. As Sarah's team secured the transport, Jung-hoon approached with his own grim news. "Captain, we've lost the Soul's Pride. Captain Minjun's ship took heavy fire, protecting a Thrakari medical vessel. No survivors." Sarah closed her eyes. Minjun had been a good officer, a good man. His death protecting aliens would have seemed impossible just a year ago. "He died well," she said. "Finally, the Thrakari ship he saved is carrying wounded from 6 different species," Jung-hoon added, "including human children from the Mars colonies." The battle continued for another hour before the extremist coalition finally broke apart. Some ships fled to deep space. Others surrendered when faced with the combined might of species that had chosen cooperation over hatred. In the aftermath, Sarah stood on her bridge, watching the rescue operations. Zarkonian ships worked alongside human vessels to search for survivors. Zircon medical teams treated wounded humans without hesitation. Thrakari engineers helped repair damage to ships from species they'd never encountered before. "Final casualty report," Torres announced. 4,200 dead. 15,000 wounded. but over 90,000 civilians were successfully evacuated. War Chief Zircon's image appeared on the communication screen one final time. His face showed exhaustion and grief, but also something Sarah recognized as respect. "Captain Shun," he said formally, "I wanted to thank you personally. My daughter was among those your team saved in Sector 4. Just doing our job, War Chief." "No," Zircon replied. "You were doing something much harder than your job. You were choosing to see us as more than enemies." Sarah considered this. "Your people killed 3 billion of mine. I haven't forgotten that, nor should you. But today, you proved that remembering the past doesn't have to mean repeating it." As the transmission ended, Sarah reflected on the day's cost. Good people had died on all sides. The extremists had been defeated, but extremism itself lived on. Peace was still fragile, still threatened by those who preferred simple hatred to complex hope. But something had changed. For the first time since the war ended, different species had chosen to fight together instead of against each other. They'd proven that cooperation was possible, even between former enemies. Jung-hoon approached, medical bandages covering wounds from the boarding action. "So what happens now, Captain?" Sarah looked out at the mixed fleet of ships working together in the aftermath of battle. Human vessels alongside Zarkonian ones, Zircons helping Thrakari, former enemies united by something stronger than their differences. "Now we go home," she said, "and we try to build something worthy of the people who died today, both the ones who died fighting for peace and the ones who died opposing it." Sarah nodded. All of them. Even the extremists believed they were protecting something important. They were just wrong about how to do it. As the remembrance set course for Earth, Sarah carried with her the memory of the young Zarkonian asking why humans would help. The question would stay with her, along with her answer. Someone had to break the cycle. Today, they'd made a start. Sarah stood before the Memorial of the Lost in New Seoul, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood War Chief Zircon, his daughter Kex, and Ambassador Zex. Behind them, a crowd of thousands weighted humans, Zarkonians, Zarkari, and dozens of other species. Today marked the first anniversary of what the media had called the Battle of Harmony Station. More importantly, it marked the signing of the Memorial Accords, not a peace treaty, but something deeper. An agreement to remember, to learn, and to choose differently. "The names on this wall," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the plaza through translation devices, "represent 3 billion human lives lost to war. But they also represent something else, a promise that their deaths will have meaning." She paused, looking at the faces in the crowd. Some showed grief, others hope. Many carried both. In the front row, she could see Jung-hoon, his left arm finally replaced with a cybernetic prosthetic that worked perfectly. Beside him sat Seo-yin's younger sister, now a commander in the Zircon fleet, and Captain Torres from her own crew. "For 10 years, Sarah continued, "we have carried our pain like a weapon, using our memories to justify continued hatred. Today, we choose to carry them like seeds instead." Zircon stepped forward, his scarred face showing the strain of what he was about to say. When he spoke, his words were translated, but their weight needed no interpretation. "I was present at the bombing of New Tokyo," he said simply. "I gave the order that killed 100,000 human civilians. I told myself they were enemies, that their deaths were necessary for my people's survival." Asterisk. A murmur went through the crowd. Some humans stepped forward angrily, but Sarah raised her hand for silence. "I cannot undo what I did," Zircon continued, "but I can ensure that my daughter grows up in a galaxy where such orders are never given again, where the question is not whether we can destroy each other, but whether we can build something together." His daughter Kex, now 8 years old, stepped up to the memorial wall. In her small hands, she carried a flower, a hybrid created by human and Zarkonian botanists working together. She placed it at the base of the wall, where billions of names were carved in eternal remembrance. The gesture was simple, but Sarah felt its power. This child, daughter of a war criminal, choosing to honor human dead. This was what breaking cycles looked like. The Memorial Accords, Sarah announced, established 3 principles that all signatory species agree to follow. Activated a holographic display that showed the document in a dozen different languages. First, full disclosure. Every species will open their war archives, allowing historians and families to learn the complete truth of what happened. No more cover-ups, no more sanitized versions. The dead deserve honest remembrance. Ambassador X nodded approvingly. This had been the hardest part to negotiate. Many species had preferred to forget their darkest moments. Second, reparations with purpose. Not just credits transferred between accounts, but meaningful action. Zarkonian engineers helping rebuild human colonies. Human medical teams treating alien populations affected by our weapons. Zircon artists creating memorials to honor all the dead. Sarah gestured to a construction site visible in the distance, where humans and aliens worked side by side on a new hospital that would treat patients from any species, free of charge. Third, the Memory Keepers. Each species will establish institutions dedicated to preserving the truth about this war, not propaganda, but facts. Children of all species will learn what happened, why it happened, and how we can prevent it from happening again. A young Zarkonian in the crowd raised his hand. Sarah recognized him, Kex's older brother, about 15 years old. Captain Chun, he said in careful standard, what if some of us don't want to remember? What if the memories hurt too much? Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. She remembered asking similar questions after her family died, wondering if forgetting might be easier than carrying the pain. Memory isn't just about the hurt, she replied. It's about meaning. Your father's actions cost human lives, but your presence here today shows that those deaths weren't meaningless. They led to this moment, where former enemies can stand together and choose differently. She turned to address the entire crowd. We don't forgive because they deserve it. We don't forget because the pain is too important. Instead, we remember with purpose. We carry our dead with us not as chains, but as compass points, guiding us towards something better. Jung-hoon stepped forward, his cybernetic arm gleaming in the sunlight. I want to add something, he said, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. When my family died in Bizen, I swore I would hate forever. Hatred was easier than grief, simpler than hope. But hatred made me smaller. It turned me into something my wife and daughter wouldn't recognize. He looked at the memorial wall, finding the names he visited every month. Mi Young Hyane wouldn't want their deaths to fuel endless war. They'd want them to build a world where no other children have to die afraid. A Thrakari delegate stepped forward. The Thrakari Republic formally accepts the Memorial Accords, she announced. We will open our archives, including records of our alliance with the Zarkonian Empire during the early war years. One by one, species representatives came forward to sign the accords. Not all of them. Some governments still preferred the simple clarity of hatred to the complex work of reconciliation. But enough. More than Sarah had dared hope for a year ago. As the ceremony continued, Sarah noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A group of human protesters had gathered, carrying signs that read, "Never forget, never forgive, and humanity first." They weren't violent, but their presence was a reminder that change came slowly and unevenly. One of the protesters broke away from the group and approached Sarah. He was young, maybe 25, with the lean build of someone who'd grown up during the war years. Captain Chun, he said, his voice tight with anger. My parents died in the Brisbane bombing. How can you ask me to stand beside the same species that killed them? Sarah looked at him with understanding. She'd felt that same rage, that same need for simple answers in a complex universe. I'm not asking you to forgive, she replied. "I'm asking you to remember with purpose. Your parents died fighting for humanity's survival. Don't let their sacrifice be reduced to an excuse for eternal hatred. But they killed them. Yes, and nothing we do here today will bring them back. But we can choose whether their deaths lead to more death or to something better." The young man stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down his face. Finally, he nodded and walked away. Sarah knew he might never fully embrace reconciliation, but at least he was thinking about it differently. Now, as the formal ceremony concluded, Sarah found herself walking through the memorial gardens with an unexpected companion, War Chief Zircon. The alien commander moved slowly, reading the names on smaller memorial stones that dotted the peaceful landscape. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Choosing this path instead of continued war?" Zircon considered the question carefully. "I regret the necessity of choosing at all. I regret that my people's fear and pride led us to see genocide as salvation. But this path? No. I've seen what my daughter becomes when she believes in possibility instead of inevitability." Stopped at a particular stone that caught Zircon's attention. It bore the names of an entire human family, 2 parents and 3 children, killed in a single bombing run. "I may have killed these people," Zircon said quietly. "There's no way to know for certain, but the dates match campaigns I led." Sarah waited, letting him process the weight of that possibility. "If I could trade my life for theirs, I would," Zircon continued. "But I can't. All I can do is ensure that my remaining years serve something larger than the hatred that created their deaths." As the sun set over New Seoul, Sarah made her way to her apartment in the city's diplomatic quarter. The space was simple but comfortable, with large windows that looked out over the Memorial District. On her desk lay a stack of reports updates from the Memory Keeper institutions being established across human space and beyond. The Zarkonian Archive had already released detailed records of their military planning during the invasion. The revelations were painful, but they provided answers that families had been seeking for over a decade. Her personal communicator chimed. A message from Admiral Chun, now serving as Earth's liaison to the Galactic Memorial Commission. "Captain, the Andorian Republic has requested human assistance in establishing their own Memory Keeper archive. Apparently, they were impressed by our model of honest historical accounting." "Interested in leading the mission?" Sarah smiled slightly. A year ago, she would have seen such a request as an opportunity to spread human influence. Now she saw it as a chance to help another species learn from their mistakes. She composed her reply. "Accepted. When do we depart?" As night fell over Earth, Sarah stood on her balcony looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, other species were making similar choices between memory and hatred, between wisdom and revenge. The galaxy was still dangerous, still full of those who preferred simple solutions to complex problems. But it was also full of possibilities that hadn't existed a year ago. Young Zarkonians learning human history. Human engineers helping rebuild alien worlds. Zircon artists creating works that honored the dead of all species. Tomorrow, Sarah would return to space aboard a new ship, the Memorial, named not for the dead alone, but for the promise their deaths had created. Her crew would be mixed species. Her mission would be to spread the principles of honest remembrance and purposeful reconciliation. She would carry with her the names from the memorial wall, but also the image of Kex, placing a flower at its base. The memory of enemies choosing to become something more than their hatred allowed. Humanity had learned to remember with purpose instead of pain. They had become the keepers of memory, not just for their own dead, but for the galaxy's hope that death could lead to life, that endings could become beginnings. The stars looked different now, not like distant threats or conquered territories, but like destinations where former enemies might learn to build something together. Sarah Chun, captain of the Memorial, keeper of memory, guardian of hope, went inside to prepare for tomorrow's journey. Behind her, the city of New Seoul slept peacefully under alien stars that no longer seemed quite so alien. The war was over. The work of peace had just begun. And for the first time in 10 years, Sarah believed it might actually succeed. Asterisk.